The lecture hall was packed tighter than a cargo hold on discount shipping day. 347 of the galaxy's finest military minds sat in those uncomfortable polymer seats, all waiting to witness what the Academy promised would be, quote, an educational experience that will fundamentally alter your understanding of tactical warfare. Commander Vex 9 adjusted his optical sensors and tried not to laugh. Educational experience? More like a public execution of common sense. The humans had agreed to send one of their so-called tactical instructors to demonstrate their approach to asymmetric warfare. One human. Against an entire auditorium of seasoned veterans from 12 different species. This was going to be entertaining. Attention, cadets and officers, announced Dean Korthak, his forearms spreading wide in what passed for enthusiasm among his people. Today we have the distinct honor of hosting Instructor Maya Torres from the Terran Defense Academy. She will be conducting a live tactical simulation using our newest holosuite technology. A ripple of barely contained amusement swept through the audience. Maya Torres. Even her name sounded fragile. Vex 9 had done his research on human physiology. Weak bones, thin skin, ridiculously limited sensory range, and a lifespan so short they barely had time to learn anything useful before they expired. Yet somehow, these creatures had managed to carve out a small corner of the galaxy for themselves, probably through sheer dumb luck. The human walked onto the stage, and Vex 9 had to admit she didn't look particularly impressive. Average height for her species, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail. She wore a simple black uniform with minimal insignia, no ceremonial weapons, no decorative armor, no intimidating modifications. She looked ordinary. "Good morning, everyone," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic system. "I know what you're thinking. Great, another human who thinks they can teach us something new. Well, you're absolutely right. I do think I can teach you something new. The question is whether you're smart enough to learn it." A few chuckles erupted from the audience, though Vex 9 noticed they were accompanied by some uncomfortable shifts in seating. The human's tone was conversational, almost casual, but there was something underneath it. Something that made his threat assessment protocols twitch. "Today we're going to run through a scenario," Maya continued, walking to the center of the stage where a holographic display unit waited. "Nothing too complicated. Just a simple tactical problem that my students back home tackle in their second year." Dean Korthak activated the holosuite, and suddenly the entire auditorium was transformed. The walls disappeared, replaced by the interior of a massive space station. Corridors stretched in every direction, filled with defensive positions, automated turrets, and shield generators. Status displays showed the station's complement, 40,000 personnel, state-of-the-art defensive systems, and enough firepower to level a small moon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Maya asked, admiring the holographic environment. "This is Firebase Omega-7, one of the most heavily fortified installations in known space. Impregnable, according to its designers, home to the Hegemony's 9th Fleet command structure." She gestured, and a small red dot appeared on the tactical display. "And this is you. One light frigate, minimal armament, crew of 30. Your mission is to neutralize the command structure and prevent the 9th Fleet from launching a counterattack against your homeworld." The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Captain Thrix K of the Altarian Navy was the first to speak. "Instructor, with respect, that scenario is impossible. No single frigate could penetrate those defenses, let alone complete such an objective." "Impossible?" Maya raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. "Tell me, Captain, what's your tactical assessment?" Thrix K's mandibles clicked in what passed for confidence among his species. "The station has overlapping defense grids, redundant shield systems, and a garrison that outnumbers our hypothetical crew by more than 1,000 to 1. Any direct assault would result in complete annihilation within minutes." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Anyone else?" Colonel Zeph Prime of the Mechanist Union raised a servo arm. "Perhaps a stealth approach. Although the station's sensor array would detect any known cloaking technology long before we reached effective weapons range." "Good point," Maya said. What about you, Commander? She pointed directly at Vex 9, who felt his cooling systems kick in involuntarily. Well, Vex 9 began, his vocal synthesizer modulating to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. The logical approach would be to avoid direct confrontation entirely. Perhaps find a political solution, or wait for a more opportune moment when the station's defenses are compromised by external factors. Political solution, Maya repeated, and Vex 9 could swear he heard amusement in her voice. Wait for a better opportunity. Anyone else want to suggest we send a strongly worded diplomatic note, more uncomfortable shifting? The human was mocking them, but subtly enough that direct offense would seem petty. Here's the thing, Maya continued, beginning to pace around the holographic display. You're all thinking like civilized beings. You're looking at this station and seeing an impregnable fortress, a tactical impossibility, a problem that can't be solved through conventional means. And you're absolutely right. It can't be solved through conventional means. She stopped pacing and fixed the audience with a stare that seemed to drill right through Vex 9's optical sensors. But humans aren't civilized beings, not really. Oh, we pretend to be. We have laws and ethics and cultural norms that keep us from doing the truly terrible things we're capable of most of the time. But when you back us into a corner, when you threaten our homes and our families, when you give us no choice but to fight or die, she smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Well, that's when you find out what we're really made of. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on the station's docking bays. So let me ask you again. You have 1 frigate, 30 crew members, and the survival of your homeworld depends on neutralizing this station. What do you do? The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute before Lieutenant QX7 of the Patrol Corps ventured, rammed the station's reactor core. Boom, Maya said, making an explosion gesture with her hands. Congratulations, you've just vaporized yourself, your crew, and everyone on the station. Mission technically accomplished, but your homeworld still gets glassed because the 9th Fleet launches anyway from their backup command center 3 systems over. Next, another pause. Then Major Fricks of the Heavy Infantry suggested, infiltrate the station and plant explosives. With what? Maya asked. You have 30 people, and they have 40,000. Your security protocols would detect any infiltration attempt within hours, and you'd be overwhelmed before you could reach any critical systems. Plus, you're assuming you can somehow acquire the kind of explosives that could damage a hardened military installation. Vex 9 found himself leaning forward, despite his better judgment. The human was right. Every conventional approach led to failure. But there was something in her tone, something that suggested she actually had an answer to this impossible puzzle. I'll give you a hint, Maya said, manipulating the holographic display to highlight various sections of the station. You're thinking too big. You're looking at this massive fortress and trying to figure out how to destroy it, but destruction isn't always the answer. Sometimes, the most effective weapon isn't the one that causes the most damage. Sometimes, it's the one that causes the right kind of damage. She zoomed in on a seemingly innocuous section of the station. Firebase Omega-7 is entirely self-sufficient. It has its own water recycling systems, atmospheric processors, food production facilities, and waste management infrastructure. 40,000 people living and working in a closed environment, everything carefully balanced, precisely controlled, optimized for maximum efficiency. Commander Vex 9's threat assessment protocols were practically screaming now. He was beginning to understand where this was going, and he really didn't like it. Now, Maya continued, her voice taking on an almost lecturing tone. What happens when you introduce a variable that the system isn't designed to handle? Something small. Something that seems harmless. Something that the station's defenses wouldn't even register as a threat. The realization hit the auditorium like a physical blow. Vex 9 heard intake valves opening across multiple species as the implications sank in. You're talking about biological warfare, Captain Thrixka said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's smile widened. I'm talking about problem solving. Your frigate's medical bay has a standard biological research suite, right? For treating injuries and illnesses during long-range patrol missions? And I'm betting this station's waste management system connects to every single deck, every single compartment, every single air recycling unit. The holographic display shifted again, showing the station's intricate network of maintenance shafts, ventilation systems, and service corridors. A web of vulnerabilities that no amount of armor or weaponry could protect. One person, Maya said, her voice now completely matter-of-fact. One person with basic medical training and access to the frigate's biological research equipment. A few hours in the lab, synthesizing something nasty from common bacterial cultures. Something that spreads through air and water. Something that incapacitates rather than kills, because dead people can't surrender. She gestured to the tactical display, where red indicators were beginning to spread through the station's corridors like an infection. Within 24 hours, you have 40,000 very sick people who can barely stand, let alone operate complex military equipment. The automated systems keep running, but automation can only do so much when human judgment is required. The station becomes a ghost ship, floating in space, completely helpless. The silence in the auditorium was absolute now. Even the environmental systems seemed to have gone quiet. Of course, Maya added with deliberate casualness, you'd want to synthesize an antidote first, for humanitarian reasons. Can't just leave 40,000 people to suffer indefinitely. That would be uncivilized. Vex 9 felt his cognitive processes struggling to parse what he was hearing. This wasn't tactics. This wasn't strategy. This was something else entirely. Something that made his entire understanding of warfare seem quaint and outdated. Questions? Maya asked brightly. Colonel Zeph Prime's vocal synthesizer crackled with static before he managed to speak. That would be considered a war crime under 17 different galactic conventions, would it? Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. Let's see. No permanent casualties if you use the right agent. No structural damage to civilian infrastructure. Minimal collateral damage. Complete mission success with zero friendly casualties. Sounds pretty ethical to me. But the psychological trauma, Lieutenant QX7 began, less traumatic than being vaporized by ship-to-ship weapons, Maya interrupted, or watching your homeworld burn, because you were too squeamish to do what needed to be done. She looked around the auditorium, taking in the shocked faces and twitching appendages. Here's what you need to understand about humans, she said, her voice growing serious. We don't fight wars to prove how honorable we are. We don't fight to demonstrate our superior technology or our tactical brilliance. We fight to win. Period. Everything else is secondary. The holographic display faded, returning the auditorium to its normal configuration. When the hegemony invaded our outer colonies, Maya continued, they expected us to respond conventionally. Fleet actions, ground assaults, traditional siege warfare. They had superior numbers, better technology, more resources. They should have crushed us. She paused, letting that sink in. Instead, we gave them nightmares. We turned their own supply lines against them. We made their soldiers afraid to eat, afraid to breathe, afraid to sleep. We made them understand that every day they stayed in human space, every hour they remained on our worlds, was another hour closer to something horrible happening to them. Vex 9 realized his cooling fans were running at maximum capacity. They call it psychological warfare, Maya said. We call it motivation enhancement. When your enemy starts thinking more about getting home alive than about achieving their objectives, you've already won. The actual fighting is just cleanup. Dean Korthak cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should move on to the practical exercises. Oh, absolutely, Maya agreed cheerfully. I have 17 more scenarios prepared, each one progressively more challenging. By the end of today, you'll either understand how humans approach tactical problems, or you'll be seriously reconsidering your career choices. She walked over to the holographic controls, fingers dancing across the interface with disturbing familiarity. Scenario 2, she announced as the display began to shift again. You're defending a colony world against a massive invasion force. You have minimal military assets but a large civilian population. The enemy has announced their intention to take the planet intact for colonization purposes, so they can't simply glass it from orbit. A new tactical situation materialized around them: rolling hills, scattered settlements, a small spaceport, and in the distance, the ominous shapes of enemy landing craft disgorging thousands of troops. Standard defensive doctrine suggests fortifying key positions and conducting a fighting withdrawal to prepared positions, Maya said conversationally. Textbook stuff. Problem is, your enemy has superior numbers, better equipment, and air superiority. They'll overrun your positions within days. She turned to face the audience again, and Vex 9 noticed that her smile had taken on a distinctly predatory quality. So, Maya said, what would you do here? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Nobody wanted to answer. Nobody wanted to find out what twisted logic the human would apply to this impossible situation. Finally, Major Fricks ventured. Guerrilla warfare? Hit-and-run tactics? Good start, Maya acknowledged. But guerrilla warfare requires resources, safe havens, and popular support. When your enemy controls the air and has overwhelming ground forces, traditional guerrilla tactics become suicide missions. She manipulated the display, highlighting the civilian settlements. No, Maya said thoughtfully. I think this situation calls for something more creative. The holographic colony world spun slowly before them. Innocent and peaceful, for now. Maya Torres stood at the center of the tactical display, her hands clasped behind her back like she was admiring a particularly interesting museum exhibit. The alien officers in the auditorium waited with the kind of tense anticipation usually reserved for impending natural disasters. The thing about invasion forces, Maya began, her voice conversational, is that they're designed to fight other military forces. They train for ship-to-ship combat, ground assaults, siege warfare, all very proper, very predictable, very professional. She gestured to the enemy landing sites, where thousands of holographic troops were establishing defensive perimeters around their dropships. But they're not prepared for what happens when the rules go out the window. When their enemies stop acting like soldiers and start acting like, she paused, seeming to search for the right word, well, like humans. Commander Vex 9 felt his optical sensors automatically adjusting focus, trying to read the micro-expressions on the human's face. Her tone remained pleasant, almost academic, but there was something underneath that made his thermal regulators work overtime. So, here's what we do, Maya continued, manipulating the display to zoom in on the largest civilian settlement. First, we evacuate the civilians. Not to safety, mind you. To strategic positions. Every man, woman, and child becomes part of the defensive network. Captain Thrixkai's mandibles clicked nervously. You're talking about using non-combatants as human shields, am I? Maya raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting interpretation. I'm talking about turning every person on this planet into an intelligence asset. Every pair of eyes becomes a sensor, every mouth becomes a communication relay, every home becomes a potential safe house or supply depot. The display shifted, showing communication networks spreading between settlements like neural pathways. The invasion force lands expecting to face a military opponent, Maya explained. Instead, they find a planet where everyone knows exactly where they are, what they're doing, and what they're planning to do next. Information flows faster than their encrypted communications. Their positions are compromised before they finish setting up. Major Fricks leaned forward in his seat. But what about actual combat? Civilians can't fight trained soldiers. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut titanium. Who said anything about fighting fair? The holographic display zoomed in on one of the enemy encampments. Hundreds of soldiers in powered armor, setting up defensive positions, checking equipment, preparing for the expected military response. Picture this, Maya said, her voice taking on the tone of someone telling a particularly entertaining story. It's night. Your enemy's forces are bedded down in their defensive positions, confident in their superior firepower and training. Suddenly, their motion sensors start going off. Something's moving in the darkness beyond their perimeter. Red blips appeared on the tactical display, surrounding the enemy position. So they go to full alert, weapons ready, expecting an assault, but nothing happens. The contacts just circle for hours, always staying just outside effective weapons range, never making aggressive moves, never presenting clear targets. Lieutenant QX7's optical sensors narrowed. Psychological warfare. Sleep deprivation. Maya corrected. After the third night of this, your invasion force is exhausted, paranoid, and jumping at shadows. Their combat effectiveness drops by 30%. Their decision-making becomes impaired. Their unit cohesion starts to fracture. She manipulated the display again, showing the civilian settlements. Meanwhile, every child on this planet is playing a game. They sneak as close as they can to enemy positions, leave small objects behind, and report back what they saw. Toys, food containers, personal items, nothing threatening, nothing that would justify shooting a kid, but the implications hung in the air like a poison cloud. But it sends a message. Colonel Zeph Prime said quietly, that nowhere is safe. That they're always being watched. Exactly. Maya clapped her hands together, genuinely pleased. And that's just the beginning. Because while the enemy is dealing with sleep-deprived paranoia, the real work is happening underground. The display shifted to show a cutaway view of the planet's geology. Caves, natural tunnels, underground water systems, mining operations. Every mining colony has extensive underground networks, Maya pointed out. Perfect for moving people and supplies without being detected. While the invasion force controls the surface, the entire civilian population is living and working below ground, completely invisible to orbital surveillance. Vex 9's cognitive processes struggled to keep up with the implications. You're describing the complete militarization of a civilian population. Am I? Maya seemed genuinely puzzled by the accusation. Or am I describing what happens when people refuse to be conquered, when they decide that their freedom is worth more than their safety? She walked closer to the edge of the holographic display, her movements casual but purposeful. See, here's what your invasion force doesn't understand about humans. We don't surrender. Not really. Oh, we'll sign papers, make agreements, go through the motions, but we never actually stop fighting. We just change tactics. The display zoomed out to show the entire planet again, now covered with a complex web of underground networks, communication nodes, and hidden supply caches. 6 months into the occupation, Maya continued, your enemy forces are controlling empty settlements filled with empty buildings. The actual population is living in a parallel society that they can't see, can't track, and can't eliminate. Every supply convoy gets harassed, every patrol gets watched and reported, every officer's personal habits get cataloged and exploited. Dean Korthak's forearms twitched nervously. This scenario assumes a level of coordination that would be impossible to achieve without extensive military training. Would it? Maya turned to face him directly. Tell me, Dean, how long does it take to teach someone to count, to observe? To remember what they saw? These aren't complex military skills, they're basic survival instincts. She gestured to the display, where small red dots were now moving throughout the underground networks. And while your occupation forces are trying to police a ghost town, the real resistance is preparing for Phase 2. Because all those caves and tunnels, they don't just connect settlements. They connect to the industrial facilities, the power plants, the water treatment centers, the spaceport. The realization hit the auditorium like a kinetic strike. Vex 9 watched as his fellow officers began to understand what Maya was describing. You're going to attack the infrastructure, Captain Thrix-Ka said, his voice barely above a whisper. Attack. Maya looked genuinely offended. That's such a crude word. We're going to repurpose it. Every facility that supports the occupation becomes a liability instead of an asset. The water systems develop mysterious contaminants. Power grids experience unexplained fluctuations. Communication networks suffer from chronic interference. The holographic display showed cascading system failures spreading across the planet like a virus. Nothing dramatic, Maya assured them. Nothing that would justify orbital bombardment or mass reprisals. Just a steady erosion of everything the occupation force needs to function effectively. Their equipment breaks down faster than they can repair it. Their supplies spoil before they can be distributed. Their personnel develop health Problems that medical scans can't explain. Major Fricks's combat implants were cycling through threat assessment protocols so fast they created an audible whine. This is systematic terrorism, is it? Maya's voice remained conversational, but her eyes had gone cold. Because I thought terrorism was what happened when you invaded someone else's planet and tried to take it away from them. She walked back to the center of the display, her movements predatory. Let me tell you what terrorism really looks like, she said quietly. Terrorism is when your occupation forces start losing people. Not in glorious battle, not in heroic last stands, but in ones and twos. A patrol that doesn't report in, a supply clerk who disappears from his quarters. A communications technician who falls down a maintenance shaft that wasn't there yesterday. The holographic display began showing casualty reports, small numbers that steadily accumulated over time. The thing about humans, Maya continued, is that we're really good at making people disappear. We've had thousands of years of practice, wars, revolutions, criminal enterprises, political purges. We know exactly how to make someone vanish without leaving any evidence of what happened to them. Vex 9's cooling systems were running at maximum output, but he still felt like his processors were overheating. And the beautiful part, Maya added with genuine enthusiasm, is that your invasion force can't retaliate effectively. How do you fight an enemy that won't stand and fight? How do you defeat people who look exactly like the civilians you're supposed to be protecting? How do you maintain discipline when your soldiers are afraid to go anywhere alone? The display showed occupation forces huddled in fortified positions, venturing out only in large groups, their effective operational area shrinking daily. Within 18 months, Maya concluded, your magnificent invasion force has become a collection of isolated outposts, cut off from reliable supply lines, unable to effectively patrol their own territory, and hemorrhaging personnel to an enemy they can't see, can't track, and can't eliminate. She smiled brightly at the stunned audience, and that's when Phase 3 begins. Because all those civilians who've been living underground, learning to fight, adapting to asymmetric warfare, they're not civilians anymore. They're the most experienced guerrilla force in the galaxy, and they're ready to take their planet back. The holographic display exploded into activity, ground forces emerging from hidden positions, coordinated strikes against weakened enemy strongholds, supply lines severed, communication networks jammed. The final assault isn't a battle, Maya explained as they watched the enemy forces collapse. It's a cleanup operation. You're not fighting an army anymore, you're fighting a planet. Every rock, every tree, every grain of sand wants you gone, and eventually you realize that staying means dying, slowly and painfully and alone. The display faded to black, leaving only Maya Torres standing in the center of the auditorium. Questions? She asked cheerfully. The silence stretched on for nearly 2 full minutes before anyone managed to speak. That's not warfare, Lieutenant QX7 finally said, his voice shaking. That's something else entirely. Yes, Maya agreed readily. It's survival. It's what happens when you threaten something humans care about, and we decide that stopping you is more important than playing by your rules. She looked around the auditorium, taking in the shocked faces and trembling appendages. Here's what you need to understand, she said, her voice growing serious. Every species in this galaxy has limits, lines they won't cross, principles they won't abandon, codes of honor they'll die before violating. Humans have those too, most of the time. But when you threaten our homes, our families, our very existence, she shrugged. A casual gesture that somehow seemed more threatening than any weapon. Well, that's when you find out what we're really capable of, and trust me, you don't want to find out. Dean Korthak's voice cracked as he tried to speak. Instructor Torres, are you saying that humans would actually employ these tactics in a real conflict? Maya's smile was gentle, almost maternal. Dean, let me ask you something. If someone invaded your homeworld, killed your people, and tried to enslave your children, how far would you go to stop them? The question hung in the air like a live explosive. That's what I thought, Maya said softly. The only difference between humans and everyone else is that we're honest about what we're willing to do. We don't pretend there are limits when survival is at stake. We don't handicap ourselves with noble ideals when our species is facing extinction. She walked toward the exit, then paused at the edge of the stage. Oh, and one more thing, she added casually. Everything I've described today? These scenarios, these tactics, these strategies, they're not theoretical exercises, they're case studies. Historical records of actual human conflicts, the blood drained from every face in the auditorium. Sleep well tonight, Maya Torres said with a cheerful wave. And remember, the Terran Defense Academy always has openings for qualified applicants. We'd love to teach you more about human tactical doctrine. She walked out, leaving behind an auditorium full of the galaxy's finest military minds, all of whom suddenly understood why humans had never lost a war they actually cared about winning. Commander Vex 9 sat in his uncomfortable polymer seat, staring at the empty stage, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Somewhere in the back of his cognitive matrix, a new file was being created. A file labeled Species Assessment Update Humans. The threat level had just been revised significantly.